Get on our phones or something like that
to make it feel more comfortable, like my usual environment. All good. So my topic today is women in trades. So looking at the whole picture. I think it's something that I'm really, really passionate about. Having been, one of two females in a workshop of 40, starting off my apprenticeship, being the only girl on site, being the only girl in this room right now. It's something that is very important to me, and something that I am very aware of, all different sides of the situation. So there's lots of different moving parts in women in trades. We often hear managers stand up in front of groups, people, we need more diversity, we need more women here. But what does that mean? How do the women get here? And why aren't they here already? So when someone stands up in front, a manager or something says, we need more diversity. Why isn't it here already? What things do we need to change to get there? And what can we actually do to go through and get more diversity and more women into trades and male-dominated areas? There is lots and lots of different moving parts in this whole situation. I'm going to briefly touch on each of these points, so I'm not going to go into anything super in-depth. It's kind of just to get a bigger picture on all the different things that influence why I am the only woman in this room. So we've got toxic masculinity, we've got our base skill, lack of role models, imposter syndrome, culture and society, we've got the gender pay gap, unconscious bias, applications of quotas, harassment, and gender roles. So I'm going to kind of start off with touching on the things that are happening in society, and then I'm going to work towards more into the workforce. So, gender roles. So this is an extract from a 1950s textbook that was taught to women in the 1950s. So some of us were alive in the 1950s, some of us were not, but a lot of those people who were taught these roles and were taught in school, your sole purpose is to be a wife. Your sole purpose is to care for your husband and to care for the children. You have no other aspirations ever. That is your purpose of being on this earth. So, you're taught, have dinner ready, prepare yourself. You have to be, ready for your husband to come home. You need to make sure there's no clutter. You need to make sure that the children are ready. You've got to make sure there's no noise so then you can relax after work. So there's don't greet him with your problems aren't important, his problems are important. Your job is to make him comfortable, your job is to listen to him, and you need to make his evening relaxing. So your goal is, in the 1950s, women were taught in school that their goal is to try and make your home a place of peace and order where your husband can renew himself in body and spirit.
That's spot on, no?
Domestic science. Because when I remember when I was at school, the girls that I knew had to do domestic science and cooking and all that shit. And I thought of that and I thought, no, they don't teach us that as well.
Yeah. So that's that base skill,
So you're being trained to be a good wife.
Yeah, that's it. That's what they were trained. So these people, the women that were trained this way, and the men who were trained or taught by society, are the grandparents now. They're the ones that have influenced their children and their children's children, so their grandchildren as well. So this stuff is still, even though it's not taught in schools, it is still what grandparents taught their kids, who are teaching the grandkids as well. So it's still in the background. So this comes on to family. So we've got our family tree, leads into that. We've got the grandparents who were taught this stuff in school. They were taught your sole purpose is to be a wife, your sole purpose is to be the husband, and that is your role. End of story. So now that's being taught down through the generations. And then we also got our gendered toys. Stuff like that kids are brought, the same brand has the beautiful girls colouring book, so they're taught that they need to be beautiful. That's your sole purpose in life, to be beautiful. Where the boys have the brilliant boys colouring book, their purpose is to be brilliant. Mind, do brilliant things, but the girls can just stand there and look pretty. And that's what the toys that our children, or the children in our society, are growing up with. They're growing up with these gendered toys. Girls play with dolls, boys play with trucks. That's what it's marketed at. There is a lot of change happening in this space, but it is still, you've got the boys aisle and you've got your girls aisle in the toys. And then we've got our base skill. So it comes down our grandparents teaching the parents, teaching the kids the base skills that they learn. So the skills that you're learning growing up. So when we said, Tony brought up before, the girls are being taught to cook, why aren't I being taught to cook? We should be taught survival skills, you know. You should be able to cook, you should be able to take care of yourself as a single unit. You know, you should be able to feed yourself, you should be able to look after yourself in the home, mow your lawns, whatever you need to do. Rego, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so you're supposed to, in my opinion, every single person should be able to look after themselves. A man shouldn't have to rely on a woman to cook for them because they haven't been taught that base skill as well. So it works both ways. And a lot of this stuff is happening at the home. So even in my upbringing, I was always working on the farm with my parents. My parents are market gardeners, and my dad's always been a market gardener. My mum has as well. So when we were working, we'd always work. We'd always be expected to do the same tasks. But when it come to the meal times, to lunch, to dinner, it was the girls that were sent inside to prepare the food. I was always, oh yeah, Louise, you know, just go start getting lunch ready. Roseanne, go and start getting lunch ready. The boys will keep working. So even though I was taught the same skills as my brothers weren't taught the same skills that I was to prepare food and to cook.
What is that car doing now? I can't work what that car is.
They're just posing next to a car.
What is that?
I'm not really sure.
Huh?
Race cars.
Race car or something.
Looks like E.T.
I can't make it up.
Alright, so the things that are being done in regards to these issues in society. The schools, they don't have specifically gendered classes anymore, even though you do find that even though there's not a gender title in it, the society kind of fact comes into it. When I was choosing my elective subjects at school, I did textiles and I did woodwork. So I did sewing and woodwork as my two subjects. In my woodwork class, I was the only female, and in my sewing class, there was only girls. So even though there's not a title or a name on those classes, the men are still attracted to the hand skills, and then the women are still attracted to, or taught to be attracted to, the homemaking skills. There are more gender neutral toys as well, so whereas before, even when I remember growing up, there was the boys aisle and there was the girls aisle. There was no kind of in between. But now we have, you know, maybe the boys aisle, the boys aisle and the girls aisle is getting a little bit smaller, and there's more of an in between kind of toys for everyone. There are a few non-for-profit organisations that are going into schools and are teaching the girls these skills that they haven't been taught maybe by their parents as well. So the changing of a tyre, you know, using a drill, using a hammer, that kind of thing. So there are organisations that go around and run workshops specifically for girls to be able to get these skills and to fill that gap. Then we've got our applications and our quotas. So I wanted to talk a little bit about quotas as well, but I'll mention that a little bit later. So applications. To get women into trades or into these jobs, they have to apply for them in the first place. And where we're seeing is a lack of applications, because a lot of people, you know, the girls who haven't been taken out in the shed with their parents, they don't think that they could be a mechanic. That's not an environment that they've seen themselves in, that they've been in, or that they're necessarily comfortable with as well. So then that leads them to to not applying for these jobs. As well as when you go into a workplace, you walk past a work site, it's very rare that a young girl will see another girl doing that job. Mostly you look up, it's the tradesman that's there. When the electrician comes to the home, it's generally a man. So it's not necessarily something that they make the connection with that they can do themselves. That leads them to not applying. As well as there's gendered ads as well, even though gender terminology, there's actually a law about it, I can't quote it, but there's a law that you can't advertise for a specific gender for a workplace job. But then it comes to the language as well, you know, we need a fit, strong person, and those words, like the strong kind of language, is more subjected to those masculine traits. As well as the imagery that people are using in their ads as well, having like male tradesmen and stuff like that in their advertising will then, you know, there's not that visibility of a female in that role. Then we've got our quotas. So for anyone who hasn't heard of a quota is just like, in this application scheme, we're going to take on 20 people and 5 of them have to be women. 5 of them have to be Aboriginal. End of story. And that's usually a top-driven, downwards kind of implement, because managers are kind of like, yep, we need to fix this, and we're just gonna put more of them in there. This has positive and negative consequences. The positive kind of things that come out of it is that if there is a recruitment process or a manager that does have unconscious bias, it forces that person to see beyond that. There is no choice for that person to continue with that unconscious bias. But on the other side, we've also got, if the girls aren't applying, or the Aboriginals, or whoever they're trying to target is not applying, then they're going to take any candidate to fill that specific role. And that candidate might not be right for that role. There's also the kind of the mental health side of things, which people don't think about. Being a woman in a male-dominated space, people often say, oh, you only got that job because you're a girl. And that has long-lasting effects on someone's mental health. You never know if you're in that position because you earned it or because you were there to meet a quota. And that has serious long-term effects, which I've seen in other girls. You just kind of feel like you don't belong. I'm not good at what I do because I'm only here because I'm a girl. And that can really hurt. Got into that. So a little bit about unconscious bias. So unconscious bias is pretty much things that we've been taught, like our brain has been almost programmed to think these things instantly when we see a person. It was generally a kind of a survival instinct where you can quickly make judgment on a situation. So, out when, we didn't have homes and we didn't like tribes people and all that kind of stuff, you look at a situation straight away. You need to know if it's dangerous or if it's not dangerous straight away. And that's something that happens unconsciously. But now in society, we're not looking for danger. We're kind of looking for the people that we're most comfortable around. We're looking for the people who are going to fit into our tribe the most. We want to see people who look like us. We want to hang around with them. So whereas things that we're taught growing up, kind of like the boys are stronger, the girls are weaker, sometimes in an application sense, you'd have a female and a male applicant right next to each other, and someone will just assume, oh yeah, this is heavy work, the girl can't do it straight away. Not even having a look at that person, just seeing the female name there can do that. Hopefully we're moving past that, but there are a lot of kind of things that come from that. So you've got your tribalism, so people are like, yep, I feel safe with people who look like me. Anyone else who doesn't look like me, no, not happening. You've got your stereotypes, so people who dress a certain way, mainly people who dress a certain way is the kind of quickest unconscious bias that you can have about a type of person. You can easily put them into groups and kind of write them off. As well, then we've got our sexism, which is male and female. We've got our discrimination and our racism, so assuming people will have certain traits because of the colour of their skin and the way they speak as well. And these are things that we don't even think about, they just happen to us. So some things that are being done, we've got unconscious bias training leaders and recruiters to then push past that, that instant assumption that, if someone was born here or someone is cisgender, they can or can't do certain things. We've got advertisements that come in more general neutral. So this is an advertisement for the Komatsu Apprentice program. So we've got a mix of, in this example, we've actually got more females in these images than males as well. So being able to see someone that looks like you can increase your chances of applying for the job, because they look like me, I could possibly do that. We've got non-for-profit organisations teaching women to be more confident, so going through different courses and things to learn skills in a safe space to then push themselves to exceed further. So sometimes for most women, being the only woman in the room is quite intimidating, so they're less likely to put themselves forward and be in a class where they might be the only one. They might feel too small, so then there's now classes that are mainly for women, advertised for diverse groups, to be a safe space for people who aren't stereotypically learning those skills in society, but they want to learn those skills. And then we've got discussions about quotas. So we need to talk about the good and the bad about quotas. We can't just, take it as a fact. There is the mental health side of things, which is the one that is most important to me. The girls that do get employed by a quota, they've got the position and then they've got all these doubts about themselves because of the way they got the position. So that's something that needs to be talked about to help deal with. Alright, so we've got the lack of role models and imposter syndrome. So lack of role models is like the lack of, being able to look up to someone that looks like you. So all the people in this room are amazing role models to me, but you will not experience the same things that I do. You don't have the same concerns that I do. So when you think of having a family and having kids, you think, oh yeah, cool, might have to make a little bit more money, take a few weeks off. But for me, my body is going to change. My mind will change. My life situation will change, and I will have to stop working for a certain amount of time. And depending on whether or not my partner is supportive or can afford to, depending on who makes the most money, will depend on how long I have to spend away from the workforce. So being able to chat to someone about my career goals who have that same worry and those same concerns compared to, yeah, cool, this is your next step. It's like we've got to slip this other step in here. This other step where I'm going to be out of the workforce. We need to learn how to, and I need someone to show me that is possible. Then we have imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome is where you look around and you don't see anyone that looks like yourself. And it can start to cause a lot of doubts within yourself. So typically, I suffer from imposter syndrome. So typically, if I'm having a really bad day, if the students, they're just not playing the game, everything's just going wrong, it's raining and can't go do our practice or whatever, then it'll come back to me. You know what? I can't do this because, no one else who looks like me does this. I'm not the right person for this job. I don't look like the other people who can do this job. So maybe, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm in the wrong spot. Maybe that's why everything is going wrong. And that's where the imposter syndrome comes from. That's what it sounds like in your head. So pretty much this is a lovely image of me on my apprentice onboarding. There was, 30, I think there was 32 of us or something, and I was the only female in that group. I was also the second female to be employed by Cummins Australia as an apprentice mechanic. So, kicking goals there. So things that are being done to sort out these kind of issues is there are mentoring programs for women in non-traditional areas. So recently I've reached out to Danielle Bull, who's GM from another section, to kind of discuss the things that I have going on, as well as there's a Transport Women Australia mentoring program, which I'm now part of as a mentee, so then I can see other women who are going through what I'm going through. As well, there's lots of networking groups as well popping up, so different like dinner meetups and little events where we can all just connect with each other and be able to see other people who look like us. Social media is a really big part of that, so a lot of women that I've met who are also tradies, I've met through social media, just because you're typically the only woman on site, so you feel like the only one. But whereas when you're thinking about it, there's generally like one woman kind of on every site. You feel isolated, but social media allows us to connect. And then we've also got conferences and events held for women in non-traditional areas, so there's specific women in transport, women in trades conferences that are happening to get women together and to kind of learn skills that will help us almost survive in this space. Toxic masculinity. So toxic masculinity is something that affects obviously both genders, mostly men, and this kind of leads into that mental space piece. The men are less likely to talk about their mental health kind of thing. So lots of young boys are taught that men don't cry. Don't be a man. Stop being such a girl if they're showing feminine traits or being emotional. Don't be a pussy. So people are men are taught this kind of thing from a young age, and then they're stuck with this kind of mentality as well. I should be the breadwinner because I am the man. Whereas that puts a lot of strain mentally on the men, as well as it makes them feel intimidated by women. Women who are like, yeah, I want to be the breadwinner in this relationship. And the man's like, no, but that's my job. I need to be the breadwinner. But it's not, you don't need to be, but it's kind of taught from such a young age. Things that are being done, so we've got men's support groups around, so we've got men's sheds which have been out for ages. We've got Trademark and Mindset, which are all kind of tradie specific mental health kind of programs. Having a lot more conversations, so like Mick spoke about before, those small intimate conversations. So things that are being changed on a kind of documentational thing is parental leave for both parents, so rather than calling it maternity leave, It's more like parental leave, so both parents are allowed to take leave. That still has a very long way to come, but it's starting to happen. Stay-at-home dads are becoming more common and accepted. So Danielle Bull and Jess Pritchard, who both work in the business, their husbands are stay-at-home parents as well. So that is becoming a lot more common and a lot more talked about as well. And then flexible work arrangements for men. So you want flexible work arrangements for men and women. So then, like Mick does, comes in a bit late in the morning for his boys and stuff like that. That kind of thing just needs to be a bit more talked about and a bit more accepted in society, so that it allows both parents to take responsibility for the children and being able to care for their needs. Alright, harassment. So, we've got this lovely little pie chart that I've made, because when I talk about harassment in the regards of the gender space, we're talking about gender-specific harassment towards women. So we do know, like, we've got the playful kind of chat, you know, the apprentices, you give the apprentices shit, that kind of thing. But this, we're talking about more, rather than harassment, supportive people versus unsupportive people. So 98% of people are supportive. 98% of people have no issue with me standing in this room being your peer. But unfortunately, 2% of people kind of do. Those 2% of people can be broken down into two groups. One group is kind of like, go home, you don't belong here. And this has been said to my face. I've had some guy come up and look me dead in the eye, you do not belong here. You should go home. I would never let my wife, I would never let my daughter do this. Had that said to my face numerous times. In that direct term, and kind of like, you know, I was field service for a little bit. Oh yeah, you should go work on this farm. This guy's single, you should just go and get knocked up and I wouldn't have to deal with you anymore. That has been said to me more than once. So that's kind of, the people who kind of have this kind of mentality are generally the older generation who were raised with that, you know, men do this, women do that, that's end of story. Then we have the kind of sexualization. So this lovely piece of graffiti was written about me when I was at TAFE. I had it sent to me a few times by boys that I was friends with. So it says, the Cummins chick with glasses is hot, what's her name, we should stalk her on Facebook, and someone else wrote down here, someone find out. So 3 people have participated in this graffiti that is regarding my body and being stalked. So, you know, 16-year-old Louise was like, oh, you know what, maybe it's a compliment. They think I'm hot, right? That's all that I was like.
Kenny gets this all the time.
Yeah, So then there's the kind of sexualization and the objectification of, you know, I'm just here for men's pleasure because I'm just something good to look at. That's my sole purpose. And with this was kind of like, at the time I was like, yeah, whatever, it's a compliment, it's fine. But the bit that kind of gets me is, what's her name? Stalk her on Facebook. These people who just wanted to stalk me, or joking about stalking me because of the way that I look. So that tends to make me feel a little bit unsafe. You know, these people see me as an object, and that's what they want to treat me like. And this is still very, like I said, you know, out of the 98, out of 100%, 98% of people are supportive. Then we've got our 2% broken down into this. So it's a very, very small amount. But in some cases, this kind of mentality costs women their lives. And that, any sign of that is just too much. I'm not an object. I'm here because I have a purpose and I can do my job and I have skills to offer. So that's the second type of harassment. Alright, so things that are being done, so we've got conversations happening for a shift in society, conversations with people who have a strong opinion. So foot tradeswomen who people, you know, some people don't know how to handle it when someone comes and says, you don't belong here. Some girls just go off their head, nah, this person's a piece of shit, like they shouldn't treat me like that. But you don't know how that person was brought up. You know, that person was brought up with that mentality that, you know, this is your place. That's what I've been taught, this is your place in the world. And having that conversation with someone like that is really hard. It is a skill that you do need to learn over time. And it's a skill that I did not have when that situation happened to me. I was actually, I was working at Daimler in Sydney. I'm doing work experience, and one of the guys said, you know, go to Rudy, he said, hey, he has this tool, just go grab that off him. So I went over to grab the tool, and he's like, you don't belong here, he started at me. And the guy that I was working with actually come over, he's like, you should have just taken her like 30 seconds to get a tool. So he come over, and this guy was like going at me, like, you don't belong here. And the guy that I was working with was like, what are you talking about, mate? Like, she's doing the job, she's doing fine, like, we're here doing this, like, there's no people is a skill. So as more women take up these roles, it's proving that they can do the work. So pretty much the way to deal with it is just to be seen, to be there. Prove myself, and women proving themselves just by existing in the space. Alright, so the gender pay gap. So gender pay gap is kind of like this big myth. Everyone has their own opinions. A lot of the opinions that are based on the gender pay gap are kind of without any knowledge or research. So the gender pay gap is on an average kind of calculation. It's broken down into that how much men versus women make per hour. Because I know a lot of people see the gender pay gap and then it's like, oh yeah, men work more hours, men do more overtime, that's why there's a pay gap. But the calculation is actually done off, broken down into like an hourly wage. The gender pay gap is something that can kind of really be seen when comparing South Australia to Western Australia. So the pay gap in South Australia is 99.2%, and in Western Australia it's 21.8%. So this comes down to the kind of work that men versus women are kind of pushed towards. So in Western Australia there's a lot more mining jobs. And mining is something that's advertised more towards men. Men do these jobs, they make more money. So then broken down, a group of men versus a random group of men versus a random group of women. Most of those men are in higher paying kind of mining, male dominated jobs, whereas the jobs that are advertised towards women are a little less, are less paid. So that's where that gender pay gap kind of comes in. The gender pay gap was not something that I really knew much about, and I was like, this is a myth. Like, I've never been paid less than my co-workers. In some instances, I've been paid more. But doing a bit of research, it doesn't have to do versus me versus Tony in this room. It has to do with a random group of men versus a random group of women having their numbers crossed over. So with this kind of situation, everything that we've discussed previously will help lead towards closing the pay gap. So having like the male-dominated jobs becoming less male-dominated, women making their way into that, that will then bring their pays up and slowly close the gap. And going forward, so I was a little bit nervous making this presentation because I've never had any issues with any of you in this room. You've raised daughters, some of you are currently raising daughters, you're raising sons, and I have no issues with anything that you're doing. I've never felt attacked. But going forward, I wanted to do this presentation to kind of show you guys in the room the main thing that someone who is already actively, equality is just like something that comes second nature to them, is calling out your mates, calling out when you see other people doing it. And that's when the change really starts to take place. You can be like, yep, I'm fine, I don't treat anyone differently, but your best mate might be like wolf whistling, calling shit, touching girls in the pub, whatever. Call them out for it. Tell them that it's not right. Other managers who are like, oh yeah, got 5 applicants, 3 of them are women, just cut them off the list. You're like, mate, did you even have a look at what their qualifications are? Maybe they'd be the best person for the job. So that's where kind of us in the room going forward can help make a difference in getting more women into trades. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good.
Very spot on time.
That's good.